Welcome to Portal to the Beyond, a science fiction novel, written by Jeffery B. Ryder. Narrated by Alexander Atkins. Copyright 2023 by MorrisBookshop.com and Shadowplay Communications Publishing. Audiobook performance copyright 2023 by MorrisBookshop.com. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without written permission from the publisher or author, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. Special bonus offer. Visit MorrisBookshop.com for a very special bonus offer and to be notified when new books come online. Again, that website is MorrisBookshop.com. Chapter 1. Beyond the gates of the spaceport, the EGAM men were in pursuit of a thief. The sound of their cries and footsteps echoed through the dark and dusty streets leading up to the main square. The square itself was empty, bathed in the pale light of Coruscant's dying sun, Lee Solaris. 2 Space Force guards, clad in black leathers, stood at the gates with their shockers holstered. They were drowsy, but one of them, a young man fresh from Earth, asked me to translate the commotion. I stepped out to listen, but the square remained deserted. Suddenly a small, cloaked figure darted into view, pursued by a mob hurling stones. The cries were incomprehensible, but it was clear that they meant to harm the fleeing figure. I warned the guards of trouble, and the mob spilled into the square. The dwarf ran towards the gateway, seeking refuge, while the mob howled and pursued him. Suddenly they stopped, as if struck by a sudden realization. I climbed onto the steps of the Trantor headquarters building to observe them. Most of the mob were chaks, furred non-humans of the EGAM, and not the better sort. Their fur was unkempt, their tails naked and diseased, and their leather aprons hung in tatters. A few humans were among them, the dregs of the EGAM. However, the sight of the star and rocket emblem on the spaceport gates sobered them somewhat. I searched for the thief, but could not find him. As I gazed around, I spotted him crouched in a patch of shadow, just 4 feet away from me. The mob also noticed him, huddled beyond the gateway, and let out a howl of frustration and rage that echoed through the square. A stone was hurled, narrowly missing me, and landing at the feet of the black-leathered guard who quickly unholstered his shocker. On Coruscant, Trantor law was written in blood, fire, and exploding atoms, and the line was drawn firmly and clearly. The men of Space Force did not interfere in the old town or any of the native cities, but when violence crossed the threshold, punishment was swift and terrible. The threat should have been enough, but instead the crowd hurled abuse, calling him a Trantoran and son of the ape. The Space Force guard stood shoulder to shoulder behind me, and the snub-nosed kid called out, telling me to get inside the gates or he would shoot. The older man motioned for him to be silent and called out my name. I nodded to show that I heard him and walked into the open square, across the crumbled white stones, towards the ragged mob. Even with 2 armed Space Force men at my back, it made my skin crawl, but I flung up my empty hand in token of peace and shouted in the jargon of the EGAM, "Take your mob out of the square. This territory is held in compact of peace. Settle your quarrels elsewhere." There was a little stirring in the crowd, and the shock of being addressed in their own tongue instead of the Trantor standard, which the Empire had forced on Coruscant, held them silent for a minute. But only a minute. Then one of the mob yelled, "We'll go if you give him to us. He's no right to Trantor Sanctuary." I walked over to the huddled dwarf, nudged him with my foot, and asked him who he was. The hood fell away from his face, revealing a furred face, a quivering velvety muzzle, and great soft golden eyes that held intelligence and terror. He held out the tray which he had shielded under his cloak, an ordinary peddler's tray, and said, "Toys. Sell toys. Children. You got 'em?" I shook my head and pushed the creature away, pointing down a street and telling him to get out of there. A voice from the crowd shouted again, and it had a very ugly sound. "He is a spy of Nebran!" The dwarfish non-human gabbled something, then doubled behind me. He dodged and feinted towards the gates, then ran for the street shrine across the square, slipping from recess to recess of the wall. A hail of stones flew in that direction. The little toy seller dodged into the street shrine. Then there was a hoarse cry of terror, and the crowd edged away, surging backward. The next minute it had begun to melt away, its entity dissolving into separate creatures, slipping into the side alleys and the dark streets that disgorged into the square. Within 3 minutes, the square lay empty again in the pale crimson noon. The kid in black leather let his breath go and swore, slipping his shocker into its holster. He stared and demanded profanely, "Where did the little fellow go?" "Who knows?" The other shrugged. "Probably sneaked into one of the alleys. Did you see where he went, Drake?" I came slowly back to the gateway. To me it had seemed that he ducked into the street shrine and vanished into thin air. But I've lived on Coruscant long enough to know you can't trust your eyes here. I said so, and the kid swore again, gulping, more upset than he wanted to admit. "Does this kind of thing happen often?" "All the time," his companion assured him soberly, with a sidewise wink at me. I didn't return the wink. The kid wouldn't let it drop. "Where did you learn their lingo, Mr. Drake?" "I've been on Coruscant a long time," I said, spun on my heel and walked toward headquarters. I tried not to hear, but their voices followed me anyway, discreetly lowered, but not lowered enough. "Kid, don't you know who he is? That's Drake of the Secret Service. 6 years ago he was the best man in intelligence before—" The voice lowered another decibel, and then there was the kid's voice asking, shaken, "But what the hell happened to his face?" I should have been used to it by now. I'd been hearing it, more or less behind my back, for 6 years. Well, if my luck held, I'd never hear it again. I strode up the white steps of the skyscraper to finish the arrangements that would take me away from Coruscant forever. To the other end of the Empire, to the other end of the galaxy, anywhere, so long as I need not wear my past like a medallion around my neck, or blazoned and branded on what was left of my ruined face.